Today I am reviewing Niccolò Rising by Dorothy Dunnett, which was first published in 1986. This is a reread for me, and it marks a return to reading Dorothy Dunnett. Almost a decade went by since I last read one of her books, and I'm pleased to say that I absolutely still adore her writing. Niccolò Rising is the first book of 8 in the House of Niccolò series. This is a historical fiction saga set in 15th century Europe. And if you're new here, hello, welcome. I'm Danny. I've talked about this before on my channel, but I was first introduced to Dorothy Dunnett through the Lyman Chronicles, which is her other historical fiction series. And it was published before the House of Niccolò, but set chronologically about a century after this one. But after I finished that, I read the first 2.5 books or so of this series, including Niccolò Rising. And then I was rudely interrupted by life and the demands of grad school. And so I never came back and finished this series. And that's what I am doing now. So I don't know that this is a disclaimer that I need to make, but if you are here because you already love this series, please avoid leaving spoilers for future books in the comments. I'm going to get to them, but this is a reread, but I haven't finished the series as a whole. So to begin with a summary, Niccolò Rising takes place primarily in Bruges in the year 1460. Our protagonist is introduced to us as Klaas. He is an 18-year-old dyer's apprentice for a dye business owned by a widow, Marion de Charetti. Klaas is introduced to the reader as a charismatic mischief maker and a bit of a fool. He is popular with the ladies, he's a good worker, but in the first chapter, he's described as having the biggest mouth in the country and the best beaten back. The large arc of this book is the revelation of Klaas's ambition and his cleverness as he makes some enterprising moves on behalf of himself and on behalf of the Charetti Company. Dorothy Dunnett also weaves real political stakes and commercial interests into the plot in a way that shows an intense amount of research and is so impressive. And to give a sense of the scope of the book, there is, in the front matter, there's a map of Europe in 1460. And there's also a 4-page list of all of the characters that appear with asterisks next to the ones that are real historical figures. And they're grouped by location and allegiance to help you keep track of all of that. The way that Dunnett is able to write about this tangled web of allegiances across Europe, both the real history and the way her own characters are inserted into it, is really expertly done. And it's done in a way where it never really, in my opinion, drags the story. I also think if you have real knowledge of those historical events that are at play here, the wars and conflicts that are happening at this time in Europe and their trajectory, it will provide an extra layer of dramatic irony, but I don't think it's required to have that knowledge going in as long as you read carefully. She does describe the context enough that you can follow along. But I will say Dunnett is a writer that demands a lot of attention in general. One of the things I find so appealing in this book and in her writing overall is her ability to generate intrigue around who the protagonist is, why he's doing what he's doing, and how in control he is over the events of the story. Dorothy Dunnett writes with this third-person omniscient style that roams around and zooms in on particular points of view to carefully control the perspectives and the biases that the reader has access to. I think in this book, we're not given access to class's point of view until around a third of the way through the novel. And even those moments are carefully chosen, right? And so the book kind of has the structure of a mystery. There's a chapter towards the end of the book where several characters are piecing together our protagonist's schemes and how he did it. That reads very much like the final lay it all out scene of a detective novel. I think that Dunnett's narrative style and judgment on when to zoom in and give us someone's internal thoughts and when to zoom out and provide an elegant summary of the geopolitical climate is what makes her writing so great and so fascinating. I find it hard to describe the writing style without quoting some of her writing, so I'm going to just read the opening paragraphs of this book. And she opens with this broad, omniscient narrator that does some framing before zeroing in on the opening set piece. And if there's another thing Dunnett is great at, it is a set piece scene. So I'll start reading chapter 1. From Venice to Cathay, from Seville to the Gold Coast of Africa, men anchored their ships and opened their ledgers and weighed one thing against another as if nothing would ever change. Or as if there existed no sort of fool of either sex who might one day treat trade as an amusement. It began mildly enough, the awkward chain of events that was to upset the bankers so much. It began with sea and September sunlight and 3 young men lying stripped to their doublets in the Duke of Burgundy's bath. Of the 3, Klaas and Felix were watching the canal bank for girls. Julius, his instincts blunted by an extra decade, was content to sink back, agreeably fortified, and forget he was anyone's tutor. A good astrologer would have told him to get out at once. So the book opens on 3 men sitting in a bathtub on a barge in a canal in Bruges, which is an image I just love. And we also open with a healthy dose of foreshadowing. In terms of themes, there is a large theme of identity and transformation in coming of age. Klaas is referred to by several different names by different people at different times. He begins the story as Klaas, this foolish apprentice, but over the course of the book, as his cleverness is recognized and as he earns more respect from high-ranking people, he acquires other names, Niccolò in Italy and Nicholas in Bruges. He's charismatic and street smart and skilled at diplomacy, but the skill at manipulation also generates a lot of suspicion from the people around him, around his motivations and how much he's changed from the person that they thought he was. The title Niccolò Rising obviously speaks to this transformation and his ascent in society. And I think it's also an astrological reference. There's frequent mentions of astrology and astrologers in the book, and someone's rising sign is supposed to be indicative of how they are perceived by others, which feels extremely apt in this book. We also see the same transformation into adulthood theme and the theme of growing into one's ambition in other characters. Felix, who was mentioned in that opening passage, is Marion de Charetti's son, who is roughly the same age as Klaas and is the heir to the business and needs to grow into that role. There are also several young women in this story who are contending with what adulthood means to them, which in their cases is generally marriage. On that note, another large theme I would say is ambition and the restrictions of class and gender. This book navigates the restrictions on women in this time period while also portraying female characters that are capable and strategic and influential within the role and station that they've been granted. I've already mentioned Marion de Charetti, who is a widow and Klaas's boss at the Charetti Company. And so in some regards, she's quite a powerful woman as far as things go. that doesn't mean she always gets the respect that she's owed, and her relationship and her growing partnership with Klaas as he becomes more important to the business is a major part of the book. We also meet a nobleman's 19-year-old daughter named Catalina von Borselen, who is at the age where she needs to marry, but she went to Scotland and turned down a marriage offer in Scotland, and she doesn't like most of the men she's introduced to, and also has the thought at one point in the book, like, it wouldn't be so bad to be a widow, but in order to be a widow, I need to get married first. And overall, I think that the women in this book are fantastic and really fleshed out as characters. The final major theme I want to mention is the relationship between parent and child and the concept of inheritance, whether that is the inheritance of genetics or traits from your parents, or the inheritance of wealth or status or title. Klaas himself is a bastard, and the discussion of his parentage plays a significant role in the story. And besides Klaas, we see several other fractious parent-child relationships on the page, not to mention the royal succession wars that are in the background of everything. In 1460, we have the Wars of the Roses playing out in England, as well as another succession war playing out in Naples between King Ferrante and John of Anjou. It's also described that the Duke of Burgundy is providing protection to the Dauphin Louis after he rebelled against his father, King Charles VII, and the Duke of Burgundy himself is having disputes with his son. And these royal disputes are relevant to the commercial interests that drive the plot, and they are also resonant with the emotional interests of the plot. And I think that's what's so impressive, that Dorothy Dunnett had the vision and the skill to draw those connections, and that is why this is a 5-star read for me. I highly recommend this book to anyone who enjoys books with a lot of intrigue, even if you're not usually a historical fiction reader. And if you are a historical fiction reader, I think this is probably just required reading. I'm kind of neutral on whether someone should start with this book or start with the first book in the Lyman Chronicles. It's been a while since I've read the Lyman Chronicles, which begins with the Game of Kings, but I would say Niccolò Rising is probably a little bit more accessible, a little bit more tightly written and easier to follow. But the final act of the Game of Kings contains some of my favorite writing ever, and the Lyman Chronicles is the more popular series as a whole. So if you wanted to start there, I don't think you could go wrong. And if you're a Dunnett fan and you have an opinion on this, where to start, please feel free to sound off in the comments. I think at this point I've done enough gushing about this book for the time being. I love it so much. I can't wait to continue reading the series. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.